Perfect. So there was a great thing that Amanda said about trying to set our CMs up for success, and that's a great lead-in to what I'm here to talk to us about today, which is how do we set good expectations for our core members. And there are three things that I wanted to touch on. One is how do we establish a clear kind of baseline, because everybody comes into to CoSA from a totally different baseline. They may have been institutionalized for a long time, a short time, they may be older, they may be younger, they may have a high level of education, they may have a low level of education, and that affects how we set expectations in the first place. So the first topic I want to talk about is how do we try to baseline our CM. The next part is how do we try to establish good expectations for them. So how can we set an expectation that's achievable and realistic for them? And the third is how do we know when success has been achieved, which is also a bit subjective, and we need to consider it as CoSA volunteers, not necessarily from where we come as people. So to talk about the first one, we want to baseline where our core members are. So when core members are released from prison, they've been institutionalized for a short period of time or a long period of time, and that defines how weird and uncomfortable they might be being reintegrated into society. We've had core members that have been institutionalized for a long time, in which case being re-released into the community can be quite foreign and shocking. And we've had people who have great support networks who've not been in for very long, and therefore they understand what their place is within the community, and they're prepared to dive back into looking for work, to building relationships, etc. So, what are some ways that we can learn where our CM falls on that stuff? How can we discover where they are in terms of their sort of life journey, and so for the purposes of trying to assign reasonable expectations? Oh, you're all just thinking that through. I know, it's a big mouthful. Well, what are some ways to understand where our CM starts from?
Well,
yes, Richard.
The process really starts with when we first meet. There is the full disclosure. That gives us a baseline of what did they do.
Absolutely. First couple of meetings are really important because we learn about their history, not just their offense history, but we get a little bit of background on where they come from, what their educational level is, and so on. So we've gone through those first couple meetings. We've learned about their offense history. What are some questions we can ask to understand a little bit more about where our CM is in life? So what's an example of a good question?
Their goals, what they plan to achieve, where are they now, where are they plan to be?
Yes. I do, but so I do have handouts. The handouts have the answer to a lot of the questions I'm going to ask, so I haven't given them to you yet, but I promise you there are handouts coming. So we'll just, good to write down little notes if it really sparks your mind here, but I do have a handout on this at the end, which I'll give you. So great question. So I'd say core members, when they come out, they're thinking very short term. They've been thinking about how do they get to leave prison and be back in the community, but haven't necessarily thought about what happens long term for them. So understanding their goals is a really, really important question to ask. Yes?
Yeah, finding out what kind of things they enjoy doing, and what things they're good at.
Absolutely. Hobbies are really, really important. Sounds like a soft question to ask, but actually trying to understand what they're interested in doing is a really great way to then put those interesting things in front of them. If they're interested in volunteering, then we want to encourage them to volunteer within the conditions that they already have. So try to find a way to focus on the stuff that they like doing. If they're passionate about it, then that's probably going to help them grow. So what other questions could we ask? There's so much experience on this side of the table, so I'm just going to hold it out. And does somebody want to ask a question?
Well, when they're released, there's a lot of fear with the individual, because as to what's going to happen, type of thing, and to be able to achieve these goals with the fear factor that they've got because of their history. So those are some of the areas that can be addressed.
Would 100% agree. So trying to understand how comfortable they are having been released. Are they very fearful of the criminal justice system? Are they fearful of being discovered as well? If they were a high-profile offender, then a lot of what we see in the first couple of months is they want to turtle. because they want to stay away from being recognized. If there's been a public notification, they certainly don't want to be outdoors for very long because they're afraid of being noticed. So if we were to set a goal of, we want you to get out there every day of your first week to try to reintegrate into the community, that's not going to be a helpful goal for them. That's going to create anxiety, not remove it. You have one more?
What about their life before they went to prison? I always think that's really important in helping us understand.
Yeah. Who they were before they committed the crime. Because right now, a lot of our core members, when they're released, they're going to feel like their entire life is based on their offense. But they were a person before they committed a crime, and they're going to be a person after that as well. They're not defined by their crime. The same way that we would hate to be defined by the worst thing that we have ever done. We're all completely eager to move beyond that. So that's a really good thing to ask as well. A couple other questions that are good to try to understand is, what is their kind of level of education, or do they have any developmental disabilities that we need to be aware of? Because that'll affect how we set expectations as well. And what kind of a support network they have. So do they already have family and friends that are speaking to them that can help them with this transition? Or do we have core members that are very, very isolated and it's just CoSA in terms of their ability to be supported?
And ask them, what was the build-up to their offense?
So what was the build-up? So sorry, let's just unpack that a little more. What do you mean, Richard?
Well, ask them if they would talk about the process that brought them to the point where they committed such an offense.
So their risk factors that kind of led up to it? Or?
Because that shows what of their risk factors they understand.
Sure.
So they give you and they like talking about themselves, so they give you the history that led up to their index offense. If they know what it is, that'll help you a lot, because then you have a better understanding how they understand what motivations, what buttons are pushing them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. If you have a core member that prior to their offenses was starting to get involved in kind of a negative crowd, not good role models, then we want to try to set goals for them about trying to meet good role models, trying to get involved in positive groups to be able to help them stay away from their sort of criminal history. So that's the first thing that we want to do, is establish a good baseline. So the first couple of meetings are really, really critical for doing that. As we heard, we'll go through their criminal history, we'll hear about their risk factors, their crime cycle, which is all really, really good. I would encourage you as volunteers to use the first kind of 5 or 6 meetings to learn as much about your core member as possible that is not just limited to their crime. Because what we want to do is get a data point of when they're released to know where they are as a person right now. How comfortable are they to be outdoors and be social? How comfortable are they with support resources that are available? What's their education level? What are their goals? What's their history and their sort of aspirations for life? Because that's going to help us understand where they are when they're released and what we're working with from the beginning. So there is no common set of rules here. All of our CMs are going to be wildly different, and I'm sure those who have sat on more than one circle will find that they've had core members at one end of the spectrum one time and then at the totally different end of the spectrum the other. So it's a real investigation for us. And this afternoon we have a great session on active listening, which is going to be really good, because we should be asking questions to understand this information. So we shouldn't be telling them a lot of stuff at the beginning. We should be listening as much as possible. So that's the first thing that we want to do, is try to set reasonable, or to understand where our CM is. Now, oh sorry, yes?
I was just going to say, ask them how they're fitting into society, because if they've been in prison for 20 years, it's different. They don't even know how to get a bank account, or they can't do this. And how are they feeling? How are they going to fit in? Have they got a plan?
Yeah, those are really, really, really good questions. And so the advantage, like I know, so for basic training, it's always really hard to talk about the first couple of meetings, because when we talk about what that's going to be like, and then when people experience it, it's a lot to take in. Because the main focus is on the criminal history, but really, really understanding where they are just beyond their crime cycle and their risk factors is also really, really important. So that's job one for us, is to properly baseline where our CM is. Now, the second part is, how do we set reasonable expectations? So we, as people, we have expectations for ourselves, we have goals, we have aspirations. How do we set reasonable expectations for ourselves? So for you personally, how would you set a goal for yourself? I'm sure everybody has been through New Year's and has set a New Year's resolution at some point. So how do we pick those resolutions for ourselves?
That's not a good example.
You know, you look at your life and you think about, okay, what do I want to work on? What do I want to focus on? What's important to me this year? So that's how I would set a goal.
So looking forward, where do we want to be in a month, a year, and 10 years? Those are ways that we tend to set goals. For people that have just been released from prison, that can create a lot of anxiety, is looking so far down the line, looking for 10 years down the line, looking for 20 years down the line. So at the very beginning, what we want to do is make sure that they're focusing on small gains. That's a really, really good thing. Now this is very common for us. I despise New Year's resolutions. Hands up if you like New Year's resolutions, I guess. Let's just stare at all the people who do. Okay, nobody does, well that's great. I find them very, very intimidating because for some reason you've decided to pick this arbitrary date to set a goal for yourself that you have to accomplish by the next year. And usually those goals are absurd. So this past year I said, I'm going to go to the gym 5 times a week. I've not been inside a gym prior to that, but I decided to set a goal that is going from 0 to 5 days a week. 2 weeks in, I've not even been to the gym, so I said, forget it, I'm not going to do it this year. Not an achievable goal, not a reasonable goal for me to set. So what I want to talk about today is the law of incremental change. Has anyone ever heard of the law of incremental change? Super fascinating idea. It's the idea that if you change all the parts of your life by 1%, your total gains will be far greater than trying to change one aspect of your life by 100%. So this actually, there's a really interesting book about the UK kind of cycling team. I don't know if anyone religiously follows the UK cycling team for some reason, but in 100 years, they were the lowest ranked cycling team in the world. They had not won the Tour de France, they had not had a gold medal in the Olympics, and then they hired a guy who thought, I'm going to try to incorporate this law of incremental change, and got them to improve the way they cycled up hills by 1%, improve their bike aerodynamics by 1%, improve each and every aspect. In the following 6 years, they won the Tour de France 5 times, they cleaned up at the Olympics in the UK for gold medals, set world records for cycling. And it's because they just looked at all aspects of their life and tried to improve them by 1%. So what are some ways that we can improve our core members' life by 1%? What are some goals we could set for them that are small and achievable?
Well, if they're targeted, just to be closer on time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not expecting 100% accuracy, but they're plus or minus half an hour for the meeting. Can we bring it down to plus or minus 15?
Sure, yeah. If you have a core member that is late all the time, a goal that's not going to help them is to say, from this year forward, I want you to be on time for every single meeting you have. That's going to be very, very difficult for them to accomplish, and means that there's going to be a smaller number of times where they've accomplished something that you can then celebrate. If you set the goal of, hey, for CoSA meetings, you're usually 15 minutes late, can we try to keep it to 10 minutes? Great goal for them to set, because now they're just looking at an incremental change in their life. So that's a great example. Tardiness. What's another?
With that, I would also give them the incentive of respect. Your volunteers are coming here out of their own time to come and see you, and so we would appreciate it if we respect your time. Could you respect ours? Yep.
It's a great point. Yeah. Now, what are some other parts of their lives that we could focus on where we can make incremental change? So we heard about tardiness. Yes?
We were trying to do sort of a bit on self-discipline.
Okay.
Just to foster that, so when the day comes that you're alone, that you can manage yourself. So we just kind of did, make your bed as many times this week as you can.
Yeah, that's...
Just as an exercise of discipline.
Yeah.
But didn't have much value to the core member, but maybe find a better example.
I would challenge that though, because to make your bed, the concept of discipline can be broken down in a bunch of different areas, but so being able to make your bed is a very achievable goal that they can set for themselves. And starting there to build up to more things is absolutely the right way to do it. To say that I want you to be more in control of your thoughts, that's a really difficult goal to set, because one, you can't really see if it was successful or not, and two, it's so ambiguous that they don't know what they're actually trying to achieve. So the idea of a SMART goal is really important, keeping it very simple. It has to be time sensitive, you have to be able to measure success. All of those components that make a goal SMART are what we want to be focusing on as volunteers. Yes?
An example, if a core member gets angry very quickly when you confront him or challenge him on something, that if you just say, if you can just work on gathering all the information first before you get angry, So just kind of slowly say, just delay the anger and just collect all the data you can have first, and then just work towards that.
Yeah, we always encourage our core member to try to think of another way that that could be interpreted. So that's the challenge to them, is if they hear something from their PO and they immediately think it's negative, they're telling you I can't do something, our challenge to our core member is to say, could you think of another way that that could have been interpreted? And getting them to stop and take a breath and say, okay, well actually maybe they meant it this way. So then they're open to more change, and the idea of, I shouldn't assume the worst thing every single time. So that's a good place we can work on. Some other small examples are, if they're really bad at budgeting, you can set a goal for this month to keep track of all your finances. So the idea that they're gonna, they'll balance their checkbook, they'll have savings put away, and that's their goal. That's a lot of change for them. But saying, this month your goal is to keep track of your finances, very, very, very good goal to set for someone who's bad with budgeting. Because after a couple months of them doing that, then you can start saying, okay, let's look at how much goes out and how much comes in. And once we've gotten comfortable with that, let's look at how we can make those numbers the same. We've done that. How can we save money going forward? So yes, it takes longer, but you will see more positive change from your core member doing that than saying, your goal this year is to learn how to balance a checkbook and save money. Because if they fail, the way that I did with the gym, then they're just going to stop doing it entirely. They're not even going to consider that aspect of their life of trying to make change.
Our core member came up with a good idea. I'm not sure where he got it from, but it's things, especially bad things, have an expiry date.
Mm-hmm.
So if parole has an expiry date, his time with this PO has an expiry date, challenge at work has an expiry date, and small, particularly most things that bring the most anger, they have an expiry date. You can only be angry for so long, and this issue will go away in it. And by focusing, he brought it in, by focusing in, well, this won't matter in such and such a time, he was able to distance himself from the immediate burn of anger.
Yep.
Am I making sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a little bit of problem with the whole idea of, find time to tell you that, Connor, that I have a bit of issue with this, because aren't these sort of our expectations? Don't we first have to find his expectations? Because when someone has an expectation of me, I'm not very happy about that. But if I'm telling them what mine, so would that be the first step?
Yep, so this gets back to baseline. So when we ask them what their goals are, what they're interested in, and what change they want to see in their life, so that's how we then structure those goals for them. So typically your core member might say, I have no support network outside of CoSA. So that's great, but that's a long-term goal. That's not something that you can say, this year we're going to find a way for you to be more involved outside of CoSA. Our job as volunteers is to break that into the 1% increments that's going to get there. So can we unpack that problem for them, because they can't see the steps to go through to get there, and try to place reasonable goals and expectations for them to achieve the thing that they have told us they want to achieve. That's a really, really important point to make, Mark. Thanks.
I think what we need to do as well is we need to get them to, we don't need to go to that incremental level. We need them to be focused on the incremental level and make some of them for themselves. So we need to make less focus on what the group dynamic is. We need to focus in on them to make their own decision toward their own goal, and to break it down so they can do one thing out of that picture, and they get the concept of incrementally making changes.
Yep, no, I totally agree with you, and I think that what you shouldn't take away from this is that it's our job to take all of their goals and map out the 1% increments to get there. At the very beginning, though, your core members are not going to be able to break problems down into smaller pieces. So our goal is to start them thinking that way and say, okay, you would like to get to here. Well, how about we do these two things first? So as soon as they do that, they start building up a bit of steam. So then we ask, okay, well, what's the next step? How do you keep moving this ball forward towards your ultimate goal of being more integrated in the community? So our job is not, and we talk about this a lot of basic training, is as soon as they rely too much on us as volunteers, we haven't really done our job, because the goal of CoSA is to create a person who is able to exist outside of the circle with all the great tools that we give them. Now, some people will never get there, but that's still the goal that we try to focus on. So that means they need to learn self-reliance and learn discipline and learn how to manage their own issues. Yes?
A good tool for that, again, is getting back to the covenant. I know a lot of us don't find it difficult to do in doing it, but it's that basically lists expectations both on our part and on their part, what we're gonna provide for them, what they're gonna do, and that's a very good thing, and that's why it's important to review it every 6 months, because those expectations change and they can progress that way. So that's a very important part of the covenant, is a very important part of CoSA.
Totally agree. So there's lots of good, so just the last thing that I want to talk about, because then we're going to do a breakout activity, because I want to hear more from you about what you think reasonable expectations are. The last bit is how we define success. Now, we are coming from a place of life where we have goals that are to achieve certain levels in work, to achieve certain levels in family. We have a view of what is a responsible career, what is a good relationship. I mean, a lot of you have kids, you're probably thinking about what kind of life you would want for them. We need to leave those at the door and re-baseline ourselves to what our CM is involved with. So this gets back to Maureen's point about what we view as expectations. So those expectations don't come from us. So we might want the best for our family members and kids. We might want them to go and pursue a graduate degree. But that doesn't mean that that's what success is for our core members. It's a really difficult thing for us to do, because obviously we do want what's best for them, but there are limitations to what they're going to be able to achieve. So we need to re-baseline what success is to us. And one good example of this is we are only dealing with people who have committed a form of sexual offense. So when we talk about things like relationships, now like a lot of us come from a strong faith background, which has made us incredible volunteers and very, very compassionate. We do need to reset our expectations, though, for our core members in that area. What we want out of our core members is to have a responsible relationship that is respectful and is healthy. And that's the bar that we've set for them in terms of relationships. So we have a core member who is gay, and I am encouraging of them to find a healthy relationship, because that's the bar that we've set for them. That's where we need to be as volunteers. So the same way that we might wish that they would make amends with the people that they've wronged, that's not necessarily where they're going to be at. And to be honest, that's a rarity within CoSA. So we need to re-baseline ourselves to what success would be for our core members. And that's a really, really, really important thing that we have to work on as volunteers. So with that, what I'm going to do is break you into 4 groups. And I've got 4 different areas of life that I want you to think about how we can create incremental change with our volunteers. So we have group 1, which will be up to the blue pillar here. You're going to work on personal life skills. So there's a list of some personal life skills that we can think about how we can create incremental change within our core member. Group number 2, you got social and interpersonal skills. There's a list of some of those. Group number 3, so service procurement skills, how they engage with services that are provided. And group number 4 are sort of job and vocation related skills. So what you're going to do is you're going to have 10 minutes to talk about these as a group and think about what you would want out of your core member and how to set reasonable goals for them in this area. And at the very end, we'll have one person from each group stand up for 5 minutes to talk through some goals that you could set for a core member in this area that are reasonable and achievable.
I'm going to tell you, I was designated to be the spokesperson for our group because I couldn't hear what's going on. And we were all over the map, so to be quite honest, I don't think we're really working on group 1, which is the person living skill, but we did touch on a bunch of other things. We weren't really united, I don't think, but correct me if I'm wrong. If I heard correctly, which I probably didn't, but I think we needed more work on this.
Some more time required for some personal care.
So we started going on to other people's groups saying that we're going to have somebody that was transgender. Right? Now we're going to deal with that particular person, but to me that's got nothing to do with group. You know, I don't think we're really addressing something for group 1.
Oh, okay. So you didn't do your homework.
Well, that's for you. And the only thing I want to suggest is that if somebody has a personal living skill, and they got personal hygiene and grooming, I would just suggest that they can swim every once a month.
Are you a bachelor?
Alright, so the bar was set fairly low. Let's move on to group 2. Do you have a spokesperson for your group? Okay, so Shirley wants to listen up.
We just talked about we didn't get past conversational skills, you know, how to organize a meeting so that everybody has a chance to speak and there isn't interference or interruptions too much with different people. So set a goal where everybody has an opportunity to speak. That's basically all we talked about.
What a slow group.
That's good. It's just so much conversation. Do people have core members who kind of steamroll meetings? Either they'll talk all the time about what's going on with them, or they won't be open. Yeah. So that can be really tough. So actually, that's like a really, really good goal, I think, for a lot of us to be able to set. Is if you have a core member, particularly if the core member complains a lot, and so their hope is to be more positive. The small incremental change we can start with is, well, let's just not spend the whole meeting talking about your issues with your PO. Let's set a cap of 30 minutes at the beginning, so that we get the other half of the meeting to be productive. We can talk about other aspects outside your PO. That's a really, really, really good 1% move. So I think that's a great thing to take away. Yes. Oh, sorry.
Something just came to me, and I was thinking, one of the big things in sort of setting expectations is realizing the fact that they've just come from a very structured, routine environment, and they're told what to do, you know, basically the majority part of their day. They have very strict rules and what they can and can't do, and all of a sudden they come out, and it's like, whoa, you know. And I think that's a really big factor in setting expectations, and a big part of the expectation is just, what is it like to be out of prison? What is it like to have time on your own? What is it like the world has changed. I mean, you know, some of them when they went in, cell phones, Facebook, you know, so I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I guess just that sometimes we have to really lower our expectations, and that having them just being able to get through a day where they're not told when to eat, what time to go to bed, this is lockdown, this is that, that's a big factor in all this, so I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, the worst question I think you could ask somebody would be, so what do you want to do? You're free now, what do you want to do? That's like being asked at 10, like, so what do you want to be? What's your chosen career profession? Because once you decide that, that's the rest of your life for you. So one thing that we want to do is try to maintain some of that routine that comes from prison, because actually the best way to set reasonable goals for us as well is to have routine and have structure. So really, really good thing to maintain is not let them be overwhelmed with the open-endedness of the rest of their life. So a really, really, really good point. Thank you for bringing that up. Group 3. Perfect.
Okay, well, we had some discussion on this, but this may be a bit of questioning as to what we were supposed to come up with. So this deals with service procurement skills. And in my view, this is where we're going through. We started from the top and worked down, but the first one in here, the fourth one down, skill in using social services and community assistance agencies, that should be number 1. Because if they don't get some kind of grasp on that, they have to rely on, we are, as CoSA, we are circles of accountability and support. Support. We're not doing things for these people. We're helping them to get their job done. They have to do it for themselves. They're already connected to a PO and a social worker and a caseworker, God knows who else, on the other side of our fence. Those are the people we need to tell them, okay, in this particular situation, have you got your MSP card? No, or applied for. Okay, good. Are you over 65? Have you applied for your pension? Can you get that? No. Okay, well, you need to go and do that. That's something you need to do. You need to talk to your PO about it. Who needs to talk to the social worker? Almost 100% of the time, people under the SO are not going to have any internet access, so they can't go and fill out paperwork online and do that kind of stuff. They need to go back to the people from the PO office and take care of it there. But we need to bring it all up for them, because they're never going to get anywhere if they don't even have a clue what's available to them. But I think you need to start with that. Agencies and services that are out there that might be relative to the core member, we need to be able to take that back to them. Yep. Just one other thing I just want to bring up that was part of the last little topic I had going on there. One thing that I think is important, I've learned this as I've gone along with different groups here. I think one of the things that we need to encourage core members to do is to journal. Is to keep a journal. It doesn't have to be a formal kind of journal. Write something down. What's going on today? Doesn't it be a sentence? I don't care. Because it's from that, bringing that journal to the meeting, we can hear some little insights about what's going on, but they may not have it front of mind when they come to the meeting. If they have all week to prepare for the meeting and we just kind of show up and then they bring us their list, as it were, then we don't really know all the things that went on the rest of the week unless we can really get it, picking them out of there and know. So if you get the journal, it means they're going to have to think of it. And they're going to have to work at it. And most of them are going to be probably completely foreign to them, but it can give a lot of insight about what's going on, what's really there.
Yeah, so that's a good tool, asking them to journal. And so what goal does journaling help them move towards, I guess? Because certainly journaling wouldn't be good for everybody, but I can see places where it would be really, really helpful. So what kind of...
I think it is good for everybody, but I think a lot of people, we already know how to sort things out in the, as being as we're in this position, so we kind of have an idea about it. But they don't.
So for our core member, as an example, so Mike, when did we ask him to write a letter to his sister? When did we first make that request? Yes, this was probably 6 months ago. We said, why don't you just jot down just a short card to say, just thinking about you to your sister. And so we thought that was a reasonable goal to set. It was not like really shooting for the stars, but it has been 6 months and we have still seen no letter. So what we learned from that is actually our core member struggles to write those down. So could we put that as goal 3 and try to set goals 1 and 2 to get them even comfortable enough to write a letter, I guess. That's kind of the way we need to be thinking, because he has been crippled by that idea for the last 6 months.
Or does he have an issue with his sister you don't know about?
Well, so we talked about that. That's how we got to the point of your sister is a lower risk person to be able to write to because you had a good relationship with them beforehand. He was keen on it, that was his suggestion. But the idea then of going to sit down to write it was too much as a goal. So we need to unpack that goal a little bit more to get him to the point where he can accomplish something he identified.
And have to be careful of writing when they're living in a group home and somebody else seeing it. That's how.
That part's true. You have to counsel it on.
You have to be careful where they are.
Yep.
We've had fellows too, and they don't tell you, but they are illiterate. They are not able to write, so we have to be aware that they're not all illiterate. Some of them are quite developmentally challenged, and they're not able to do that. But a lot of them are, as Phil said.
Yep, absolutely. That's great. Good discussion, everybody. Okay, we'll come over to group 4.
The one other thing is that, like, when you mentioned about going back to the social services to get things done, think about what we can do as volunteers also. Because, like, we had an example with one guy that he had to do his tax return. He's not allowed on the computer. He went to his PO. They can't have access to the computer, the company, the federal government one with it. And he was like, it was a catch-22. He had to submit it, but he had no way of doing it. So we sat down in a coffee house one time and just went through with it. It took us about 3 times, I think, before we finally figured out how to do it, to apply for it online, because we hadn't done it. But we worked with him, so don't be afraid to hold the hand of your individual when he's doing things. If you're asking him to write a letter, maybe to say, do you want to sit here and tell me what you want to say and we'll write it, or whatever else. So walk with them in their journey, not just looking out for other agencies or other people's to do it. What can we do to help them? We had one guy with transportation that had never used a compass card, didn't even know how to do this. So you take them and show them how to do it. You go with them, so journey with them. That's the only thing, instead of leaving it up to other agencies. There's a lot of things we can do that we're not doing.
Let's thanks. It's your group right now. All right, group 4.
Our group looked at vocation-related skills, so just by its very title, it's fairly practically oriented. So we thought that it was really critical at the outset, working with the CM, to really understand where their interests lie. What do they like, what do they dislike, what are they good at, what do they like doing, and what interests they have in learning new things. Because all of those are affirming and positive influences to encourage. Reading, although I don't think most of us had an experience where basic literacy was an issue, but the feeling was, if it is an issue, to put them in touch with resources, whether it's adult learning or taking them to the library to encourage reading and things like that, provided it's within their conditions, of course. And appropriate activities, encouraging these things that build awareness and self-confidence. One person noted that the CM is from the Aboriginal community, and they took him out to the Museum of Anthropology at UBC, which is quite good, obviously. The other thing was to work with the parole officer to see what programs are available and how they can access those community resources. Work BC has a ton of stuff, support and training programs, half-day, one-day, two-day programs to operate a forklift or health and safety, etc., and all that sort of stuff. We also touched on a common issue of authority issues where the CM kind of jumps to conclusion often and thinks the worst of a concern that's raised by a PO, and practical skills to work with this is don't assume the worst, put yourself in that person's shoes, and how to turn something into a positive, so not to jump to conclusions. So building those skills and encouraging that behavior is very important. We've touched on the issue of self-control, and don't try to change things that can't be changed. This notion of putting an expiry. So if clearly there's something that the CM can't change, okay, we're going to change the parole system, forget it. It's not in the cards. But little goals, one day at a time, language, reduce your swearing and things like that. And then finally, the importance of listening, both by the CM in terms of who they are working with, but also the core volunteers, and being good listening. Because sometimes all of us probably come from a background where we've come from hopefully a fairly healthy, functioning sort of family life, and where things are obvious, you don't have to state, but often with the CMs, they obviously haven't come from functioning home lives and backgrounds, and what we take for granted or we assume, we have to be careful we don't assume that the CM has those skills. So that was what we came up with.
Great. Very good. Well, that was great, everybody. Thank you very much for participating in that. I would really encourage you to keep thinking about this, because I think trying to set reasonable expectations is one thing I've felt over the last couple of years at CoSA that has really stretched me, is just understanding how to break problems down and to help our core member accomplish their goals, and to also keep my definition of success in check when I'm working with an individual core member. Because certainly that has changed in the circles that I've been a part of. The key thing to remember as well as CoSA volunteers is every day that we have a core member who is not reoffending, who is maintaining a positive attitude and a good place in the community, so that's a successful day for us. That's where our bar is set at, is keeping the fact that there will be no more victims, we have safety in our community. So would really encourage you to think about that and try to think about ways to help your CM break down problems and set reasonable expectations for themselves moving forward. And now, I've delayed you long enough, and now you've earned lunch, so that's wonderful.
Doesn't Connor do a great job?